Today we're going to talk about one of the lessons that you often don't hear others talk about, which is the importance of walking with Christ in obedience. So I have a question for you. If God were to tell you to put on a tank top, shorts, and sandals and go to the most exclusive church in your city dressed like that, would you do it? Well, that's exactly what God asked me to do in a vision that He gave me. Watch this. The way this story unfolded in my life, I shared in an earlier video, God just delivered me from drugs and alcohol. I didn't have to go to treatment. He just took it from me. And I began to follow Him, and He began to lead me into this relationship with Him. And then I had this vision, this dream vision. It's the only one I ever had up until this point in my life anyway. And it was so real, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. But it was so strange. Because in this dream vision that God had given me, I saw this red tank top that was draped over a coat hanger that was hung on my doorway in my bedroom so that I couldn't walk past it without bumping into it and seeing it. And I couldn't come back into my bedroom without bumping into it and seeing it. And so I didn't know why God would give me this kind of dream vision. I thought, surely He doesn't want me to really put this red tank top, shorts, and sandal on and go to Riverbend Church, which was the church that I was attending at that time, which was one of the most exclusive churches in all of Austin, Texas, in a very ritzy area. Nobody dressed that way. And so I was very troubled by this. Why would God ask me to do this? At that time, I was very concerned also with what other people thought about me. And so here I am having this crisis of belief. And so I did the only thing I could think about doing, since I couldn't stop thinking about this dream vision God had given me. And I set up an appointment with one of the pastors at Riverbend named Rick. And I'll never forget going into Rick's office. I walked in and he had this real serious look on his face, and he says, "Okay, how can I help you?" And I told him the dream vision that God had given me that I couldn't stop thinking about. And I thought he would tell me, "Oh, God would never have you do that. We don't want you to dress that way at Riverbend." And then he would give me an excuse so that I didn't have to go through with it. To my surprise, though, that's not what he did. After I shared this with him and told him that God had given me this vision and I was supposed to do it for 4 weekends in a row, 4 Sundays in a row, he said, "I don't know why God would have you do that." He said, "But I can't give you any advice at all on that." He said, "That's between you and God. You'll have to just continue to pray about it." Which was not the answer that I really wanted to receive. I wanted him to tell me that I didn't have to wear that for 4 Sundays in a row. As I left his office and walked down the pastoral hallway there where all the pastors' offices are, I noticed that another pastor's office door was open, the associate pastor of Riverbend at that time, whose name was Gordon Smith. And so I banged on the frame of the door, I'll never forget, and I said, "Gordon," "can I talk to you for a minute? I need to get some wise counsel." And he said, "Sure, come on in." And so I walked in and I sat down and I explained the same thing that I explained to Rick, thinking maybe Gordon, who was older than Pastor Rick, would tell me that I didn't have to do that they didn't want me to dress like that at Riverbend. And so to my surprise, though, after I shared the dream vision and what God had given me, he said the same thing that Rick said earlier. He said, "I don't know why God would have you dress like that." He said, "But I can't give you any advice at all." He said, "That's between you and God. You'll just have to continue to pray about it." When I left there, I did pray about it for a couple of more days. And I realized that I needed to at least one weekend put on the red tank top, shorts, and sandals. The thing I was concerned about, though, was not just putting on that outfit, was also that I had tattoos that are on my upper arms that would be totally exposed in a red tank top, shorts, and sandals. And so I asked a friend of mine, Todd Mikowski, who was attending church with me at that time, that if he and his friend Katie would meet me in the parking lot, they could escort me into Riverbend that first Sunday. And they agreed to do that to help me. And I figured if they walked on either side of me, no one would see my tattoos, and that I would be able to safely make it into the sanctuary and not be such a big distraction for everybody. At that time, the pastor of Riverbend was Gerald Mann. And I'll never forget that when he announced that we would have a meet and greet, as I began to shake some of the hands of the neighbors that were seated around me, I'll never forget the look on some of their faces. There was a persecution that I felt as they looked at me, and I could just see it in their eyes. Why would you come to church dressed like that? And the strange thing was that all of a sudden Jesus, who I have looked up at on the cross, and this godly figure seated at the right hand of God Almighty, and all these things that I had heard about Jesus, all of a sudden became more personal, as I got to experience something that drew me closer to Him than anything I had experienced up until that point in time. I identified with the persecution that He experienced when He walked the earth. It was a strange feeling in my inner man, my spirit man. There was a new identification with His walk that started to come alive in my own life. After that first Sunday, I didn't know quite how to make sense of that feeling, but I just knew that I wanted more of it. And so what I decided to do the next week was to go back to what my normal routine was up until that point in time, which was to go to Bible study before I went to church. I figured surely that in a small group setting like that with people that I had known, that some of them would ask me, why are you dressed like that? But to my surprise, nobody did. In the hour-long Bible study before church that following Sunday. And then something totally unexpected happened. As I was walking to the main sanctuary, all of a sudden the person that was in charge of all the greeters came up to me and he says, hey, can you help us out today? He said, we're short-handed at a person and we need somebody to greet people and hold the door open when they come into the sanctuary. Suddenly I found myself with hundreds of people approaching the sanctuary that I was the one now greeting at Riverbend, which is a mega church. That Sunday in 2003. I thought surely there's going to be a bunch of people that look at me funny and have frowns on their face, and to my surprise, the vast majority of them didn't even seem to notice. But there were some that looked at me like, why in the world are you dressed like that at church? The following Saturday, I was praying and I was reading something in my Bible. I wasn't really conscious of what it was I was reading, and all of a sudden God's glory fell upon me. Some call it an overwhelming sense of God's presence. Some call it a connection deep within our soul. It's also been called the glory cloud by some. I don't know how to explain it other than I was overwhelmed in God's presence. And at the same time that I was overwhelmed in His presence, which lasted for a pretty long time, I felt this just transference of joy unspeakable that was being poured into my life. My brain just couldn't understand what was happening. I was trying to understand, but at the same time I just sat there like a baby just crying as God, just in His love and His compassion and His tenderness, just touched me, touched my heart in a way that I just can't even put into words. When the presence of the Lord finally left, I was still trying to process what I just experienced. And then the Lord spoke a thought impression into my mind. And He said, go back and read what you were just reading. And I went back and I read Acts chapter 5, verse 41 and 42, which talks about how the apostles were faithful and being obedient and preaching about Jesus. And the religious leaders of their day persecuted them and flogged them, but that they were filled with joy as they left to go to the next town because they were counted worthy to suffer for Christ. And then I knew that God is rewarding me with His presence, His overwhelming presence, for doing something that I don't know many people that would do. But He was teaching me that obedience is really important. That this was one of the pillars in my faith journey now for 17 years that I think makes my walk a little different than some others, is the fact that He taught me this lesson Himself, this very important lesson, the spiritual marker in my life about the importance of obedience and just allowing God to lead us on this journey that we have with Him, this faith journey. I didn't know it then, but a couple of years later, God would lead me to put together an event and target 360 churches in the greater Austin area called the Power of the Cross Festivals. And that when the Lord had me put that together, that I would experience great persecution from the religious leaders of the city that looked at me and said, "Who are you? By what authority are you doing this?" That I would take on a challenge that was to this day the greatest challenge that I've ever faced. Matthew chapter 28, Jesus said, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations and teach them to obey all that I have taught you, because I'm with you until the ends of the ages."